In this lesson, we'll learn about some basic color schemes. Okay, now, as a graphic designer, part of your responsibilities or your day-to-day workflow is going to be choosing colors that work well together. These colors that work well together, this is also called harmonizing. These colors have color harmony. They have a relationship between each other that makes them pleasing to look at, makes them pleasing to the eye. Now, choosing colors that harmonize well for a project can really send it over the top, but choosing colors that don't work well together for a project can sink even the best design. So, in looking at this, you may think that this decision-making process involves some guesswork, but there's actually no guesswork at all involved. There's actually a process for choosing colors. There is actually a series of color schemes that are very basic that we're going to talk about now that are just a really good place for you to start looking for colors. So let's go ahead and get started. Here in front of me we have our basic 12-segment color wheel, the same one we've been looking at all throughout this course, and we're going to go ahead and hide that here. Let's go ahead and talk about our first color scheme. Now, the first color scheme here is called achromatic, and really this isn't a very good example of color because there is none here. Achromatic means without color, so this kind of color scheme is just going to use blacks, whites, or shades of gray. And if you're using this kind of color scheme, you're probably developing for some kind of a black and white publication or something going to a black and white printer. Now that we've talked about achromatic, let's go ahead and move on to the next color scheme here. Now, this color scheme is called a primary color scheme, and this should look familiar. This color scheme uses our three primary colors in primary red, primary blue, and primary yellow. It uses these three colors or tints, shades, or tones of these three colors. Now, because these three colors are all pretty bold, they're fully saturated, they're all pretty demanding on our eye. They all demand a certain amount of attention, so it may be wise for your project or your design to choose one of the colors maybe as at full saturation to really highlight certain things or call attention to things, and then tone the other two back with either a tint, a shade, or a tone to really kind of ease them down a little bit. These colors can be pretty aggressive on our eye. I've got here sort of a sample color palette if we just zoom in here, and I've added a couple of tints, a couple of shades, and then 3 strips of gray here for tones. And maybe you do something like this and you choose a few of these little swatches within this palette for your color scheme for your project. This would be a primary color scheme. So now that we've talked about a primary color scheme, let's go ahead and move on and let's talk about a secondary color scheme. Now, this secondary color scheme uses our 3 secondary colors in our violet, our orange, and our green, and it either uses them at full saturation or variants of these colors using tints, shades, or tones. Just as with the primary color scheme, I've got a sample color palette down here, and it's just sort of got some swatches. Same example, a couple different tints, a couple different shades, and 3 strips of gray here. Just providing a variety of different colors that we could sample from for our palette. This would be the secondary color scheme. And since we've gone ahead and talked about primary and secondary, let's go ahead and move on and talk about tertiary. Now, this is called a tertiary triad color scheme, and you wouldn't be using all 6 colors with this color scheme. There's actually 2 options here, and I've highlighted those by using a dark gray triangle and then a light gray triangle. So you would use one of these 2 options for your color scheme. And again, just as in the 2 examples before this one, I've got a couple different color palettes here, just with some example tints, shades, and tones. And I can just tell you, just by looking at these 2 palettes, my eye is initially drawn to this one. I sort of like this blue color here and the way it's working with this orange and the harmony that's created between these 3 colors. Now, that's just my personal preference. You may actually like the other palette better, but this is a tertiary triad color scheme here. Let's go ahead and move on to our next example. Now, our next color scheme is going to be called a complementary color scheme. Now, this is the first time we've mentioned complementary colors. Complementary colors exist opposite each other on our color wheel. So every one of our 12 segments of the color wheel has a complement. These complementary colors are very high energy, and they have a lot of contrast between them. Now this contrast creates a really vibrant look, especially when we're using these colors at full saturation. Now, just to give you just a slight heads up, these colors at full saturation can be really difficult to use in large quantities. So if you're doing an entire layout in complementary colors, it can really be difficult. But let's go ahead and just zoom in here and look at the example palette that I've got. And just got some different tints, shades, and tones here again of these two complementary colors. Now, again, there's a complementary color for every color on our wheel, so we could do any two complementary colors here. Whichever combination best meets the needs of our project, because after all, we aren't necessarily going to choose the colors for our project. Our project really kind of chooses the colors for itself based on the needs of our client and the needs of our target market. Now, in this lesson, we've broke down and talked about 5 basic color schemes. In the next lesson, we'll pick up where we're leaving off here and talk about 5 more basic color schemes.